we can start. So, good evening, everybody. I want to extend our condolences to Denise. Denise just lost her dad a few days ago. Let's dedicate tonight's learning in his memory, Chaim Moshe ben Avraham. May his soul have an ascent, and may he be a good, how would we say it in English? May he accomplish great things for your family. And I'm sure you guys will continue to give him tremendous joy.
Thank you.
So, I was trying to think how to start tonight. How many of you are familiar with the term hangry?
Angry?
Hangry with an H.
Oh, angry.
What's hangry? Harriet, what's hangry?
It is when you're hungry and you get angry because your blood sugar is low and you're not in a good mood.
Right. So if you ever deal with young children, you may be very familiar with the term hangry. Make sure everyone eats before they get hangry. So I was wondering if a soul can get hangry too in its own way. If we say that a soul's food is its, spiritual connection, giving it Torah, giving it all the holiness that it was used to before it descended into this world, what happens when we deprive a soul of Jewish connection? It could get very frustrated. Um, there's a Kabbalistic teaching that a lot of times what people experience in this world as anxiety, emptiness, I'm not talking about clinical anxiety, but I'm saying just in general, that like emptiness, that feeling of needing something more, the feeling of being disconnected. Hi, Lorraine. Sometimes what it really is the soul is just hungry or thirsty for connection. Now, a person may not understand what it is, and they might think like, oh, let me get that new car. I'm gonna feel better after that. Or let me go on one more vacation. Let me splurge on something else. Let me do a day of self-care. And they're still feeling empty because really it's coming from the soul. Our soul needs care, just like our body needs care. And we're in a section of chapters that's talking about what happens when my soul is not really cared for. What happens when I overly indulge in materialism to the extent that my soul reaches a place of like disconnect and even numbness because my entire focus is on my materialistic needs and my soul doesn't feel. And suddenly Yom Kippur comes and I don't get inspired. And I, study something holy and it doesn't move me. And, with this, we started this conversation, I believe, in chapter 29. So is the answer that I'm not learning enough? Am I not doing enough? Sometimes I'm learning enough. I'm learning a lot. But if my soul is in a place of being desensitized because it's been neglected, so to speak, for so long, then sometimes even a lot of exposure to holiness is not going to awaken that sensitivity and that inspiration. We all have it. I don't think any of us, purposely neglect our souls, but we all have the areas in our life where we, kind of focus more on materialism than on our spiritual needs. And we all have those either times in our lives or areas in our lives where we sometimes fall into this numbness. Now, chapter 30 was a whole discussion on when I'm feeling numb and I realize that I cannot get myself inspired, I need to be a little harsh with myself. I need to break the ego. I need to look myself in the mirror, have an honest conversation, and remind myself that I'm not as okay as I think I am. It's not so good for me to be complacent. I really could be a much better person. I'm really a little too self-absorbed. And having this kind of harsh talk with myself can help shake my godly soul back into feeling because it kind of breaks my animal soul and it allows the light to shine through. It allows my godly soul to start feeling again. This was a whole, discussion that we had for a few weeks. And if any of you missed it, you're welcome to go back to the recordings. Chapter 31 that we're in middle of picks up the conversation and says, well, we just said that we sometimes need to have a harsh talk with ourselves, which, by the way, is not the way of the Tanya. The Tanya is usually very positive and is all about, the positivity and the love and the connection. We just said that sometimes I need to be a little harsh with myself. Isn't that a little extreme? Isn't that going to make me feel down and depressed? Is it okay to sometimes be a little tough with myself? Is there room for tough love in a positive relationship? That's the conversation that we began last time at the beginning of chapter 31. And we mentioned a quote from the Zohar that says, "The from the forest itself comes the handle for the axe." If I'm going to chop down a tree, the Zohar says, how do you chop down a tree? You need an axe. And a good axe, it has the sharp section and it has a wooden handle, meaning that the handle had to come from the forest. And then the handle that comes from the forest could then go back and chop down a tree. And what the Zohar is getting at is that in order to counter negativity, yes, I need to do a lot of love and a lot of positivity. But when there is something negative, sometimes the only way to get to that negative, the only way to defeat the negative is by using a little bit of negative. Meaning I kind of need to go to the root of the problem to deal with it instead of just glossing it over and showering it with love. So yes, our general approach is very positive and full of love, but there is room for, when I know that there's a real, when I'm experiencing a real numbness, there is sometimes room for a little bit of negativity on the road to create a more positive relationship. And we've been discussing, how do you measure this? How do you decide what is being too harsh with myself? What is too negative? How much negative is okay? And the Tanya really introduces a different type of negativity that's not sadness. It's what the Tanya calls bitterness. The Tanya differentiates in the beginning of this chapter between sadness, feeling down. Oh, I'm such a horrible person. How could I have done that? I must be, X, Y, and Z. I probably, I'm not even important. I'm not even, nothing I do counts anymore. Nothing matters. And, we know how that downward spiral goes. There's a difference between that and what the Tanya calls bitterness. Or maybe I would translate it as frustration. And the Tanya says it's not okay to be sad. It's never okay to just be sad, negative, upset. But it is okay to be frustrated. It is okay to look at myself in the mirror and say, hey, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not really doing such a great job. I really need to fix things up. And the litmus test to know if what I'm experiencing is sadness or frustration is where I go from here. Because if I look at myself and I say, oh, I'm really not doing okay, I'm such a horrible person, forget about it, nothing matters, not going to work, not going to school, go back to bed, let me just flip on the TV and, waste the rest of my afternoon. Yeah, that was not frustration. That was just negativity, and that's never okay. But if I look at myself and say, I'm frustrated, I haven't been doing things the way I want to, I need to fix things. You know what? Tomorrow morning, I am making an appointment with, this and this person to do. Then I know that that was frustration and it was healthy frustration. It is healthy and okay for me to feel that kind of frustration in order to get myself back on the right track. And the Tanya also mentioned that this is not a way of life. It's not, we're supposed to feel frustrated every day. But on occasion, when I sit down and I, do my accounting and see what I'm up to, maybe it's the end of the week, maybe it's the end of the month, maybe it's the end of the year. When I sit down to kind of see where am I standing, where am I holding, then it's perfectly okay to experience that kind of frustration. The other thing we touched upon last time is Tanya said one more thing. Another good time to try to experience this frustration is when I'm feeling down anyway. Sometimes life happens, things happen that really get us down. And instead of just sinking into misery and saying, oh, why me? Life is so horrible. I'm going through such a difficult time. Sometimes I can utilize the negative experience that I'm having to say, hey, I'm feeling bad right now anyway. let me at least channel this to self-improvement. Let me see what are those things about myself that I am a little frustrated about, that I can channel this negativity to try to work on myself and fix those things. I think this is pretty much sums up what we've done until now in chapter 31. Now, just for the sake of Denise and everyone else, I want to differentiate that we're talking about sadness that comes from reflecting on my actions. Mourning is a very different kind of sadness. And as King Solomon says, there's a time to mourn and there's a time to rejoice. It is, Torah actually gives us guidelines about mourning, but it's perfectly okay and perfectly positive, meaning not positive. It's definitely the right thing to be mourning and to be feeling sad when, when there's a death of a loved one in the family. That's not what the Tanya calls the bad negativity. The negativity that the Tanya refers to as very bad is the negativity that comes from reflecting on things that I've done and that getting me down and making me feeling all depressed. So I just wanted to differentiate with on that point. Any thoughts or questions before we read the section inside? Yes, Arlene.
I just wanted to comment what a better choice of words frustration was than bitterness. I
Okay,
think
good. I'm happy.
it gives a whole different feel to it. Frustration begets action, I just think it's a much, much better term.
So I agree with you. I think that sometimes we have to translate the words into just like modern day words that it means the same thing, but for example, someone I think mentioned this at my house, maybe it was Eileen. I don't know. Somebody recently mentioned this at my house. It said, when the Tanya talks about depression and everyone gets all worked up, like, what do you mean? There's clinical depression. And it's like, wait a second. Look, the Tanya was written in the 1700s. When the Tanya uses the word depression, it's definitely not referring to clinical depression where, please, if you need to consult a mental health professional, like, the Tanya's not speaking about that. The Tanya's speaking about that general feeling of just being down and feeling sad and trying to manage those kind of feelings. So yeah, I definitely think that when the Tanya says bitterness, if frustration captures the same exact thing, we definitely can translate that as frustration. I'm going to share the text so we can read some of this inside before we go on to the second half of the chapter. 1 second.
Something's wrong with the Zoom.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay, some of you will remember also that last time we spoke about the Tanya described the soul as like a princess who's stuck in a serpent skin. And when the princess is pulled out of the serpent skin, when it's pulled out of the place that it's trapped into, it brings a tremendous joy. So this is the part of the chapter that transitions to the section. So I'm going to read from the highlighted section. Let him say to his heart, indeed, without a doubt, I am far removed. I'm utterly remote from God. I am despicable, contemptible, and so on. But all this is true only of me. That is my body and my animating soul within it. Yet within me there is a veritable part of God which is present even in the most worthless of my fellows, so that even if I am no better than he, I still have this part of God within me, namely the divine soul and the spark of godliness itself clothed in it, animating it. It is only that when the body and animal soul are in such a lowly state, the divine soul is in exile within them. If so, then, on the contrary, the further I am removed from God and the more despicable and contemptible, the deeper in exile is my divine soul, and all the more it is to be pitied. Therefore, I will make it my entire aim and desire to extricate it from this exile and return her to her father's house, to restore it to its source and its original state as in her youth. Meaning, the Tanya is trying to explain how is it that by getting frustrated at myself, it doesn't make me sad. It doesn't cause depression. You might say that I get so frustrated in myself, so now I'm feeling really down because I'm such a horrible person. Tanya says, no, you have to realize if there's only one you, then when you get frustrated at yourself, yeah, I guess you start feeling really depressed. But when you realize that, wait, there's two parts of me. There's the godly part of me and there's the human part of me. The part I'm getting frustrated about is the human me. It's the regular part of me that makes mistakes. But hey, I have dual citizenship. There's also a part of me that is perfect. That's like that princess stuck in a serpent skin. So when I think of it that way, as much as I'm getting frustrated about the fact that the princess is stuck, I'm not mad at myself. I just become determined to unstuck my princess. I just realize that I'm frustrated that I've gotten to where I've gotten to, and it's time for me to pull my princess out and restore her to her true way of life. So when I think about it in this way, and when I remember what I'm really frustrated about, I don't get down. I can look at myself and I could see all the mistakes that I've made, and it doesn't make me depressed because I say, oh yeah, my princess is really, really stuck. Like so, so far removed from the palace. And if anything, the more mistakes I've made and the more horrible, so to speak, I feel about myself, I just say, it really turns that frustration into pity, where I start feeling bad for my godly soul of, oh, look where I've dragged it to. And what that leads to is a determination to, I'm going to fix this. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get on the phone with so-and-so. I'm going to, start doing this particular mitzvah. I am going to really make changes. And then what that leads to is the greatest joy. Because when I am able to turn things around, even before I turn them around, when I'm able to see a path forward and see where I'm going, that brings the greatest joy. It's like, I know we've said this a long time ago. We gave this example, when you're like driving and you just start getting lost. I don't know if it happens to anyone else, but definitely happens to me all the time. I'm driving somewhere and I have the GPS on and I don't know, somehow I missed the exit, right? So, oh my, okay, we missed the exit. Another 8 minutes added to my drive. Now I keep driving, trying to get back on track. Oh no, now I took the left turn instead of the right turn. And your drive is just getting longer and longer and longer. And it's just so frustrating. And then you sit down, you study the map, or you ask someone smart next to you. You realize where you need to go. You turn onto the right highway. And yes, you're still 45 minutes further than you're supposed to be. But as soon as you put yourself on that right path and you know that now you're on the path that's going to get you there, now you feel joy. It's like, all right, I know I'm getting there. Yeah, I might be late, but I already know where I'm going. And that's how the Tanya describes that the greatest frustration actually leads to tremendous joy. And if anything, the greater my frustration was, the greater joy it leads to. There's another example in the Zohar of when
Thank you.
someone's
Put some peas in there. You'll love it.
sorry. There's another example in the Zohar of when someone uses a bow and arrow, right? And I'm trying to shoot an arrow. In order to get the arrow to go further, I need to pull the arrow closer to my heart. You think, an arrow? Why am I bringing this arrow towards my heart? But really, the closer I bring it to me, the further it's going to go. The more frustrated I am, the further I realize I have strayed from where I would like to be. Instead of that getting me down, it could really become the greatest springboard for me to go so much further to a much happier place. But the key is to be honest and to really recognize where I am. I have to have that harsh, honest talk with myself. If I just like fluff it over and, try to pretend nothing happened, and I'll just be complacent, right? If I'm not willing to recognize what's really wrong with what I'm doing and with where I am, then complacency just breeds more complacency and it doesn't get me anywhere. I need to, kind of go into the forest, get the wood, use it to form an axe, and then I could start making progress. And that serious conversation I have with myself is short, it's pointed, and it starts bringing change. And the second I start making that change, that's when the joy begins. And now the Tanya brings in something very interesting. It brings in the story of the Jews leaving Egypt. We all know the story. We celebrate it every year, Passover. We say, how did the Jews leave Egypt? In a tremendous hurry. How much of a hurry? Well, so fast that their bread couldn't even rise. Does anyone know how long it takes bread to rise? Well, if you study the laws of Passover, it's 18 minutes. So, 1 second. They were in such a hurry. They had been in Egypt for hundreds of years, and suddenly they're in such a rush to get out. They don't even have 18 minutes for the bread to rise. I mean, when I try leaving the house with my kids, it takes more than 18 minutes start to finish. Like if I would put the dough on the counter and we, by the time we finish loading the car, it already finished rising. How is it that the entire nation of Jews, who are like a million people, are enslaved forever, and then suddenly, boom, they just have to get out so fast? And there's another interesting piece where if you follow the story carefully, Moses doesn't ask Pharaoh to leave forever. He tells Pharaoh, we want to leave for 3 days. And then they just don't return after 3 days. And that's where the story goes, that Pharaoh saw they didn't return after 3 days, and he got angry, and then he started chasing them, and that's when the whole story of the splitting of the sea happened. By the time the Jews were ready to leave Egypt, Pharaoh was very ready to let them go. I mean, they experienced the 10 plagues. He was done with them. He wanted the Jews out. Why did Moses have to use deception to get them out? I mean, they were, at that point, they were in a pretty powerful place. Moses could have told Pharaoh, we're going, we're out of here, goodbye. We don't want to see you ever again. But instead, he uses this deceptive tactic where he says, we're going for 3 days and then we'll be back. So the commentaries ask, what's that about? Now, here, the Tanya, there's a lot of different answers for it, but the Tanya here brings a very interesting answer. Tanya says, the Jews weren't in a rush because they were afraid that Pharaoh would change his mind. It's not that the not having 18 minutes wasn't because the Egyptians are going to be after us if we take longer. And the deception of the 3 days wasn't because Pharaoh wouldn't let them go for longer. By the time the Jews were ready to leave Egypt, they needed to rush out because they were afraid of themselves. Now, remember, Egypt symbolizes when somebody is trapped in their complacency, in their old ways. Leaving Egypt is leaving your personal boundaries, kind of getting out of the trap that you've fallen into and moving into a better space. What happens when we get used to doing things a certain way is we become very comfortable with it. And it becomes very uncomfortable to look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm really not in a very good place. And as soon as I do tell myself I'm not in a very good place, what will likely happen a few minutes later is I'll start to justify it in my mind, even subconsciously. I'll be like, well, I've been through this and I've been through that. And anyway, I'm, better than this one. And you should see how bad she is. And you should see how much less the other person does. It's very human to do that because it's uncomfortable for us to face our own imperfections. When the Jewish people were facing their own imperfections, when they looked at themselves in Egypt and they realized that we have to get out, as soon as they were ready to get out, Moses wanted them out super quick because he knew that if they wait, even the 18 minutes, they're not going to want to leave anymore. They'll be like, well, we've been here for so long and, maybe the slavery is not so bad and we're going to go now and be in the desert for 1,000,000 years. Like, maybe we can handle this, and all the different things that we tell ourselves. Or maybe if the Jews would be telling Pharaoh that they're leaving forever, they would freak themselves out. They say, I don't want to leave forever. Like, Egypt is all I know. This is my comfortable place. Like, this is where I've always lived. This is where my grandparents live. Like, this is where all my friends are. I don't know any other life. So the trick to getting the Jews out was it had to be super fast, and they had to kind of deceive themselves to say, no, we're just leaving for 3 days. We're just getting on with it. Once they're already on their way, then they could tell themselves, all right, I did this once. I lit my Shabbat candles once. I did it twice. I did it 3 times. I think I could do it a little more. What this teaches us about ourselves is when I have that honest conversation with myself and I realize that there's something that I need to change, I need to make sure to change it fast. Now, that doesn't mean, we talk about change, that you need to do things one step at a time. You can't overnight become a new person, but you need to jump into action quickly. So let's say, for example, let's take a, non-holy example, but somebody decides that they go to the doctor, they get their blood work, and I'm really not in a healthy place. I really need to change my eating habits. And it's really hard and I don't want to. And, we talk to ourselves and we tell ourselves why I don't really need to do this and I could really manage without it. When I get to the place that I realize I really need to do this in order to be a healthy person, at that moment, I need to go online and like sign up for the gym membership or sign up for the, dietitian. Because if I don't do it right now, when I'm still in that place of inspiration, I'm going to justify my way out of it. So, back to our discussion, the Tanya is going to quote this idea from Egypt, and then it's going to say, when I'm in that place that I have this honest conversation with myself and I'm making decisions about how to fix things, I need to make sure to act very quickly. You can't ease your way out of it. You need to jump into the decision. In Hasidic circles, we often use the term hachlata, which in Hebrew means a decision, hachlata. When someone is at a very inspiring lecture or a very inspiring Hasidic Farbrengen or some other inspiring event and everyone feels on a high, we're always told before the evening's over, don't leave before you took on a commitment to do something better. You could think, what's the big rush? It's 11 p.m. by the time the event was over. I'll think about it tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll come up with my commitment, with my new mitzvah that I'm going to take upon myself. The idea of committing right now, even though it's so late at night and I don't have too much time to think about it, is because inspiration will die down. And if I decide to do it right now, once it's a decision, I'll have to stick with my decision. But if I don't jump into a decision, there's always a risk of kind of walking back on the whole thing. Thoughts or questions before we read this inside? We're so quiet today. Okay. Let's read it inside. Let me just see where we are. Okay, so in the printout, it's page 7. Let me just share it right here. Okay, this form of divine service, in which the divine soul breaks free of its exile within the body, while the body and animal soul remain in their lowly state, is analogous to the exodus from Egypt, of which it is written that the people escaped. That's the terminology used. We say it in the Haggadah at Passover. The Jews told Pharaoh that they would leave Egypt for only 3 days, but upon being released from his land, they escaped. At first glance, it seems strange. Why should it have been so, in a manner of flight? Had they demanded of Pharaoh that he set them free forever, would he not have been forced to do so, having been stricken by the plagues? The explanation, the Alter Rebbe goes on to say, lies in the spiritual aspects of the Exodus, and this was reflected in its physical counterpart, just as every event in Jewish history reflects a parallel spiritual process. And here is going to explain that the enslavement in Egypt reflected that enslavement by impurity, that feeling that we feel that even when we kind of realize that we're not doing something really good, we're enslaved by that, by that impurity, and it's very, very hard to pull out. I'm going to the highlighted text, but escape was necessary because the evil in the animal souls of Israel was still strong in the left part of the heart, the seat of the animal soul. For their impurity, the impurity of the klipa did not cease until the giving of the Torah. Yet their aim and desire was that their divine soul leave the exile of the Sitra Achra, the impurity of Egypt, and that it cleave to God. This is a good time to mention again that Tanya focuses very much on the fact that we need to recognize that we have 2 active souls inside of us. And even if we become the ideal version that the Tanya wants of us, which is to be a Benoni is someone who is in full control of their actions at any given time. But even a Benoni will always struggle with negativity and with natural desires and inclinations. So even the person who reaches this highest state, even when they decide that they're going to do something really, really good, there's always going to be the other voice that will then come and say, maybe at that moment, maybe a few minutes later, that's going to say, well, do you really want to commit to that? Why did you commit to, keeping Shabbat every week? You should have just said you'll do it for 1 week. Why did you commit to start doing kosher? Didn't you already realize that it's actually too difficult for you? Or if you weren't raised with it, God probably doesn't really expect that. There's always going to be that justification process. So when we follow the leaving Egypt model, and we say, nope, I'm going to decide on something and I'm going to keep it. And of course, don't decide on something that's bigger than you can handle, but at least decide on something. Take that step and jump into that step. Thoughts or questions before we go to the next section?
I love the metaphor that you're blending through this class. You know, the Egypt, the wandering, the deception, how we all try to fool ourselves. Like, I love the psychology of putting that together. And I was just thinking that, like, we do play these little mind games on ourselves. Like, I think you literally just quoted me, Dini, on one of them that you used as an example. You know, I mean, we I get that whole, I was writing it down when you said you have to act now because your brain will start questioning it, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks. I didn't make that, can't take the credit for it, but you're right. That's why I feel like the Tanya is very real. It really reflects back to us, you know, that we're normal. If it's hard for us to make good decisions, and if we make decisions and then we want to walk back on them, we're just human. That's how humans operate. And that's why you need to kind of beat the system by, you know, by following the manual and knowing how you're going to work with it. The last thing that Tanya says, we already said that it's going to bring me to joy, because once I'm on the right path, it's going to bring me joy. So even though this was like a frustration or a bitterness, it leads me to a place of joy. The last part of the chapter, the Tanya is going to bring in an additional point of why it actually, this frustration is going to bring me even greater joy. And here the Tanya says that if I continue to have this conversation with myself and I say, all right, I'm in a really lowly place right now. You know what? Let me take it from a different angle. If someone asked you, what's better, consistent Judaism or moody Judaism? You know, someone who's consistently involved in Jewish life and maybe not extreme in any way, but they're just very consistent and predictable, or someone who's moody about it, where one day they're super into it and the other day they're totally not, and you know, they're constantly flip-flopping back and forth. Which one would you think is better? I think most people would say consistent. Like, as long as you're consistent, right? Like, it's, you know, you just want to have predictability. While that's true, the Tanya highlights here something interesting, that if I'm consistent, but I'm never extreme, that means I never really get into it. I might be a very disciplined person and I keep things very consistent, but you know, when you meet someone who's like really moody and one day they get like super into it, that intensity that they feel and they experience is something that the consistent person never experiences. So if anything, there is a tremendous benefit to the, you know, call it moody Judaism over the consistent one. When we recognize that, we realize that not only should I not feel bad that I landed up in the place that I did and that I'm not doing things the way, you know, I think I should have, and I'm so far from where I want it to be, but actually there's a benefit to it, because now I have the opportunity to come even closer. I heard a quote from someone who said, the day that you start doubting is a day that you can really start believing. If someone never experienced doubt, if someone never experienced distance in their Jewish experience, then they can never achieve real closeness. You know, they can have this, you know, mediocre, predictable relationship with Judaism. It's only when I experience a real low that it can then catapult me to a real high. And that's the last thing that Tanya says in this chapter. It says a person needs to sit and think, wait a second, how is it that I landed up in this place? How is it that I'm not, you know, my, you know, moral clarity is not where I thought it was going to be? Well, I'm not, you know, doing as much as I think I should be doing. Oh, I know why. Because God created me this way. Remember, he put me as a godly soul in a human body. And remember, human bodies have human tendencies and human desires. So the only reason I'm here is because this is how God created me. Wait, why would God create me this way? Why wouldn't God just put me as a godly soul who basically could just be an angel and just serve God all day and do all this? Like, why did God create this very physical world with us humans? As Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev said, you know, God, if only you would have put all the desires and all the physical things that people want in the books, and you would put holiness and godliness all around us, of course we'd be doing what you want. But you did it the other way around. So then what do you expect of us? We have to open up the books to get inspired. But when a person goes through this thought process and they realize that, wait, the reason that I'm experiencing this is because this is how God designed it. Why did he design it this way? Because what he truly wants is not a bunch of angels who just do whatever he wants. He actually wants people who experience struggle to, within the struggle, within the darkness, to choose light. And that brings God the greatest joy. So if anything, the fact that I am not where I think I'm supposed to be means that I have the ability to accomplish something that a tzaddik can never accomplish. And if anything, the further away I am, the greater I could potentially accomplish. And when a person thinks about this, it will give them an even increased level of joy, where you say, you know, I am an hour and a half behind my schedule on the GPS. I am so far off where I'm supposed to be. Oh, wow. I now have the ability to give God even more joy, because when I come from so far, that gives God the greatest joy. And the proof is that, you know, our world, our physical world, is the lowest world. It's the last one that God created. First, he created the world, the lofty world and the worlds of angels. And then at the very end, he created the human physical world. He could have skipped that last step. He could have been very happy if he just created angels. But the fact that he went so far as to create us humans with our human desires and our human experiences is because the greatest joy that he desires is when we, within our human experience, choose him. And if that's the case, reflecting on the negative things I've done and how I need to fix them, not only should it not make me depressed and sad, it should give me a tremendous level of joy that I have the opportunity to, you know, really, really spring forward. This reminds me of a great story. The story is told about Rabbi Shalom Ber Lipsker. He was the first Chabad rabbi in Florida. So he shared that during the time of the 6-Day War, the Lubavitch Rebbe came out with the Tefillin campaign, where he encouraged his Hasidim to go everywhere and find Jewish men and get them to wrap tefillin. And he gave a specific instruction to the shluchim in Florida, to the Chabad rabbis in Florida. He said that they should focus on reaching also the important Jews. They should get to the important Jews and make sure that they also wrap tefillin. So Rabbi Lipsker, who was a real legend, he decided he's going to find the most important Jews he knows and get them to wrap tefillin. And the most important Jew he knew at the time was his bank manager, who was a Goldstein. So he figured, okay, I'm going to get this important Jew to wrap tefillin. So he makes an appointment with the bank manager. And of course, after a long wait, the bank manager, you know, asks him what he wants, and he explains that he needs him to wrap tefillin. You know, it was an unusual request, but he went ahead and he wrapped tefillin, and he told him, you're doing it for the Jews in Israel, and it's going to bring safety and security to the Jewish people. The next day, Rabbi Lipsker came back, and he said, I'd like to meet with the bank manager again. And of course, he said, let's wrap tefillin again. The guy's like, oh no, I can't believe you're back, you know? And the third day he did it again. And the fourth day he did it again. And at some point, the bank manager is like, okay, right, Rabbi, this is very nice, but not like every day. Like, you're not supposed to keep coming back every day. So apparently, Rabbi Lipsker said, they created this bet. There was some sports team that they were both fans of. And or maybe there was a game, and they were each fan of a different team. They basically made a bet that, like, if your team, if the rabbi's team wins, then you agree to keep wrapping tefillin every day. And if the bank manager's team wins, then the rabbi's not coming back to bother him. Game happens, and of course, Rabbi Lipsker's team wins. And so the bank manager goes ahead and he purchases a pair of tefillin, and he says, I'll be wrapping tefillin every day before work. Well, what happened was that after a few days of keeping his commitment, it became really hard for him. The way the story was told to me is that he was a very meticulous kind of guy, you know, the kind of person who needs his schedule set just so, and if anything takes too long and, you know, anything goes off schedule, it really throws him off. So throwing in this extra, you know, 5-10 minute ritual into his morning was really like messing up with his schedule. And after, I don't know, a week or two of doing this, he calls Rabbi Lipsker and he says, look, Rabbi, I know you won the bet, but I can't do this anymore. It's just too much. So how about this? I'll make a nice donation to your organization, and you'll have more time to go and wrap tefillin with a lot of other people. Rabbi Lipsker says, thank you very much, but I'm not going to accept that. I need you to keep wrapping. So he says, well, you know, I'll make a $10,000 donation. He says, no, not going to work. So then he ups his donation. He says, I'll make a $20,000 donation. You just need to get me to, you just need to stop. They kept going until I believe he reached 50,000. Now this is in the 60s. So this guy was willing to make a $50,000 donation to Chabad so that other people will wrap tefillin, but leave me alone. And Rabbi Lipsker said, no, I can't accept it. So at this point, the guy got really frustrated with him. He said, you know, I'm going to report you to headquarters. Like, what's your boss going to say if you're refusing such a big donation? So then Rabbi Lipsker told him a very powerful line. He said, if God wants me to have a lot of money, he has many ways to bring me a lot of money. But when God wants Goldstein to wrap tefillin, only you can make that happen. And he accepted it, and apparently he continued to wrap tefillin. And I don't know who this guy is and if he's still around, but when the story was documented, he was still wrapping tefillin many years later. The reason I found the story so powerful is, you know, that idea of God wants Goldstein to wrap tefillin. Like he wants you in your particular circumstances to do what he wants to do. And someone else doing it, someone else lighting those candles, someone else giving that charity, someone else wrapping that tefillin, it's not going to have the same effect. Because God, the reason we believe that everything is by divine providence, God creates every person with their unique circumstances and their unique abilities and their unique limitations. And then he says, you, within your circumstances and your limitations, I want you to serve me. And the greatest gift that we can give God is within our limitations, with our abilities and our struggles. When we do something and when we push ourselves, that's greater than a $50,000 donation. That's greater than the other person doing it 100 times. And like we mentioned before, for one person, lighting the Shabbat candle takes so much effort that it might give God much greater pleasure than someone else lighting Shabbat candles very easily, or sometimes we compare ourselves. We're like, for me to keep this little bit of kosher, let God take her kosher. Like she does kosher all the time. Like she can do kosher for me too. No, your effort in kosher is something that, only Goldstein can wrap his own tefillin. You doing your kosher is a gift that only you can give. And that gives God the greatest pleasure. That might be the reason why your soul landed up in this particular circumstances with these particular gifts and limitations so that you can give this, precise recipe of joy to God. Let's just see that inside the Tanya. Here, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here, this is talking about the person's internal meditation. I'm on this line of certainly it is true. Certainly it is true. This is what the person should say to himself, as said above, that I am utterly remote from God. But it was not I who created myself in a manner that permits the divine soul to be exiled within the impurity of the body and the animal soul. It was God who created me thus. Why then has God done such a thing? To cause the divine soul, part of his light, which fills and encompasses all the world, before which all is not, to descend into the body, into my body, and be clothed in a serpent skin? Why did God do this? Why did God put his piece of him inside me, who's so lowly and so far removed and wasn't raised in a very Jewish home and, didn't get a very good Jewish education? Why would God do that? Surely this descent must be for the sake of a subsequent ascent. And this is actually a famous line in Hebrew. Ein ze kim yerida zu hi letzarech aliyah. This descent is for an ascent. The reason God put me in this circumstance where I am so far, or I don't know if I'm Harriet, you'll have to forgive me for saying this, but Harriet likes to say, I'm just a Reformed Jewish girl from Jackson, Mississippi. Like, what does God expect of me? Well, the reason God particularly put you in this place where you feel so far and you're like, all the way in Jackson, Mississippi. Yeah, because that's what he wanted. He was hoping for the greatest ascent to happen from this particular descent. This is to elevate to God the entire animating animal soul, which derives from klipas noga, also its garment of thought, speech, and action, by means of clothing them in the thought, speech, and action of the Torah. So by performing a mitzvah, by speaking words of Torah, no matter how far I am or how far I feel or how far I've gone, I am able to then bring an ascent to my godly soul. I'm able to lift it up from this place. And like we gave the example last time, like a princess who is exiled in a serpent skin. When I pull that princess out, that's like the greatest joy. When we said last time, when a hostage returns, and you could look at it in two ways. You can say, oh, but look at this poor hostage. They're so filthy and they're so skinny and they're so malnourished and they have there's so much weighing on them. Or you can say, look where they've come from. Look where they're going. That gives us the most tremendous joy when we realize that no matter how far we are, and if anything, the further we are, the greater joy we can give to God. And that actually leads us to the greatest joy. So if we're going to sum it up, I would say that what this chapter seems to be saying is that we need to be real. We need to be feeling Jews. We can't be these like complacent, consistent Jews, as long as I do it consistently, as long as it's predictable, I don't want to do too much. I'm not going to, we need to be real. We need to be living on a level where we're real. We're real with ourselves. And sometimes being real with ourselves means having harsh conversations with ourselves. Not the kind that make us depressed, but the kind that bring us to realize who we are, where we've come, and what we need to change. And that, I would say, is living on a soul level. When I live on a soul level, when I recognize that I'm not just what I see in the mirror, I am actually a godly soul. I'm a beautiful princess who is like stuck in this physical body. And my goal in life is to help this princess emerge and reconnect and to make my soul not hangry, to make my soul nourished and satiated and connected. That will bring me the greatest joy, and that will allow us to really feel. And that actually is a segue into next chapter, because if this chapter focuses on living on the soul level, allowing us to feel tremendous joy, next chapter 32 is going to talk about how living on a soul level allows us to feel true love for other people. Because there's nothing like living on a soul level, being aware of our soul, being aware of our true inner spiritual selves that allows us to be the most authentic selves that we have, that we could be. And that is the end of chapter 31. I'm happy to answer any questions or comments or discussions. And otherwise, we shall see you all next week.
I just want to say hi, everybody. But also, I feel like we're seeing this so much today more than ever with with the stories that are coming out from the hostages. They were in places that were so dark, where they were stripped of everything. They had nothing. No, it was pure darkness. And that's where they found light. So many stories of hostages that kept Shabbos fasted Yom Kippur for the first time, or made Kiddush on Friday night, all these little things in the place where it was the most dark. But also, like, to segue into what you were saying, like, they were stripped of everything physical, and that's where they were able to find Hashem.
Right. Right. So we discussed this a few times in the past that we can, like, we can choose one of two ways. Like, hopefully it never has to be done to us. Like, hopefully we're never in a situation where all our physical is stripped of us, that then we're left with nothing but spiritual. We can, while living a very normal life, kind of do the same thing with a mindset, with a mind shift. When I look and I realize that, hey, like, what I'm looking at is only the physical. Like, let me live on a more authentic level, on a deeper spiritual level, then I can reach that same space, which unfortunately people also reach when they experience, very traumatic situations. It brings us back to our discussion a bunch of weeks ago where we said, how you see that a lot of people, after they experience a very difficult situation, whether it's a job loss or a loss of a person, or, a marriage falling apart, or some terrible situation that they go through, suddenly they like have this awakening. Like, what happened? What changed? And like you said, it's like when suddenly, like, the externality is stripped of them, and they realize what they're really left with and what's really important. But through what the Tanya's goal is really to get us to kind of get into that mindset within our regular lives, like to be able to look at ourselves and say, wait, why am I living on such a superficial level? Like, let me get real. Let me realize that there's something much deeper here.
There's I'm not sure whether it's Buddhist or Hindu saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And I think that's, one of the things is that, when we have these ahas, whether it's a painful experience and we reach that new level, that it's hard sometimes to take that past that kind of crisis point or that climax point, because we still have our daily lives, and the challenge is how to bring that into chopping wood and carrying water. So saying the blessing.
I never heard that expression before, but that's it. I wonder if that's similar to what the Tanya is saying. That's why, like, jump into it. When you experience that moment of that aha moment, at that moment, say, all right, I am committing to X. Because if you don't jump on it and, create action right away, then yeah, it's very easy to fall back into your old ways 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really funny. This is very personal in what you just said, but so I feel like the tiny little things, well, I wrote it down because I was like, wait a second. Okay, so the tiny little challenges and things that people do bring God tremendous joy. And then I wrote down, when we struggle, we have the opportunity to honor God through accomplishing whatever it is that we're struggling with, right? So, but then, because that's me, I'm like, okay, well, that covers me. But then you said the thing about really observant people, and that theirs aren't as because they don't have to struggle. It's like, oh, okay, good. She did it. She lit the candles again. Oh, good. Okay. She kept kosher again. But I don't know that I feel that way. You really think that Hashem is up there going, it's so easy for Deanie, but Lorraine, this is kicking her. This is really wow. And getting a little chuckle watching me do different attempts at things.
Well, if you remember back in, I think it was chapter 15, if I'm not mistaken, Tanya dedicates a whole chapter to someone who, what it describes is a Benoni, but they're still not serving God. They're doing everything right. They're ticking all the boxes, but God still doesn't consider them a servant of God because they're really not pushing themselves. For whatever reason, it comes easy to them. Maybe they're just really bookish and they're just really totally happy to study books all day and they don't have any great desires to, I don't know, go to the bars and have fun and, cheat in business and whatever else other people have desire to do. Or maybe they were just raised this way and it's very easy for them to do it. But so long as a person is not pushing themselves, then that's not the joy that God wants. God wants every person to find their limitations and push beyond their limitations. So, yeah, for me, if, lighting Shabbat candles on time for me is easy, you definitely can say that me lighting my Shabbat candles on a regular Friday afternoon versus what I like to tell the students, a college student stopping before the party on Friday afternoon, setting an alarm, knowing that it's candle lighting time. I'm going to go light my candles. Almost like who cares what she does later. Those 5 minutes that she took to light her Shabbat candles in her, apartment on a college campus in a very spiritually dark place definitely carried a lot more weight than me lighting my 10 candles every single week, because mine wasn't pushing any limit. But then again, I have the things that are hard for me. I have the things that are difficult for me. So I need to find those things, and those are the things that I need to push past my limitations. And the same is for that student. Once she gets used to lighting candles every week, so at that point, she's already reached a place where it's not hard for her anymore. So then you have to kind of find your next step. What's the next thing I'm going to push myself to
So
do?
wait, let me just ask a question. So what you're saying is that God doesn't want us to struggle. God wants us to continue to elevate our soul, to continue to grow. Not that God is taking joy in my struggles and challenges or illnesses or whatever, fill in your blank, that everyone has something they're dealing with. It's not the challenge, it's the potential to elevate the soul
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
bringing joy. Because I think
Yes.
when I was reading my notes, I was like, wow, I don't like that thought that my struggle brings God joy. I didn't like putting those two
No,
together.
it's
So
the
I think
struggle.
it's
It's the
the
pushing through
elevation,
the struggle.
pushing through the struggle, elevating the soul, continuing to grow and change and evolve and reach towards God. Those are things that bring the joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that
Okay.
well, and also with the teaching that, we're told that God doesn't give anyone a challenge, doesn't give them the power to overcome. Because the point of a challenge is not
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that.
us,
Yeah.
right? Point of a challenge is to elevate us. Actually, it reminds me of the Torah portion we're just coming from. We're coming from the Torah portion of Noah, the story of Noah and the flood, right? God was upset with the people of the earth and he wanted to destroy the earth. So he brought a flood. Really? He couldn't just make the earth disappear. He couldn't just say like, let there be nobody, and like have people disappear. Why do you have to bring a flood? What's that about? And the Hasidic teaching is that a flood represents cleansing. He wanted to, he wasn't bringing a flood to destroy the world. He wanted to elevate the world. He wanted to purify the world. And, it's actually interesting. The flood lasted for 40 days. The measurement for a kosher mikvah, a kosher immersion bath, is also a measurement of 40. It's called 40 sa'ah, which is 40 of a certain biblical, Talmudic measurement. But the idea is that when God brings a challenge, it's not to crush, it's to elevate. And if God gives us a challenge, it's because he also gave us the particular ability to get through that challenge. And this is, it ties into a different teaching in Tanya where one of the ways that Tanya teaches us to deal with difficult circumstances is when I realize that the more difficult my circumstances, the more God believes in me. God gave me these very difficult circumstances because he knows that I can overcome them. He didn't give my circumstances to, someone else because he didn't give them the ability to overcome these type of circumstances. So yes, we don't wish difficult circumstances upon anybody, and everyone should only have, health and happiness. But when we are in a tough situation, it's not by accident. It was very clearly designed, and God said, I needed someone to dig the diamond up from like deep, deep down in that, dirty cave. And I chose you for that job. So you're the one maybe bringing the diamond from further away than someone else. It's harder to get there, but there's a greater joy when it comes back. Have a wonderful week, everybody. It's nice seeing you all.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that one point.
Of course. Thank you
Yeah.
for
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. That was a great class.
Great
Thank
class.
you.
Thanks, Amy.